Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Cassie Christopher, registered dietitian. Hi everyone, I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I'm with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we welcome Cassie Christopher, and she is a registered dietitian. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. So tell us what a registered dietitian does.
Yeah, sure thing. So registered dietitian, sometimes also called a registered dietitian nutritionist, because who doesn't love, word salad and alphabet soup? And so a registered dietitian is someone who has education and credentials in the study of nutrition. I am able to provide medical nutritional therapy, so meaning I can help people with diseases, with chronic diseases, use nutrition to feel better, and I can also work to prevent some of these chronic diseases with nutrition. And usually the question that follows is, what's the difference between a registered dietitian and a nutritionist? Am I right? Were you thinking it? Mm-hmm. And essentially, the difference is anyone can call themselves a nutritionist, but a registered dietitian has specific education credentials. There's a credentialing board. I had to take a test, and it was the hardest test I've ever taken. So let me tell you, they aren't just letting any old person in. So that is the difference. Now, me specifically, I don't work that generally, like I just described. I really focus on helping women 45 and up to heal emotional eating specifically, so that they can feel comfortable in their body. And oftentimes that emotional eating makes people feel out of control around food, anxious about food, not trusting their own body signals with relation to food. And of course, that can lead to a lot of health issues. So I'm really working with people to prevent or find ways to eat in a way that honors their body and helps them feel good.
And when you're working with someone, do you have to have like their medical history, medicines, like if they have chronic pain, do they have this, do they have that? Is that kind of where you start?
Yeah, sometimes, I would say probably a traditional registered dietitian does start there because that information is important in understanding, how food could benefit someone or how food may be hurting someone. And there's a lot of food and drug interactions. So, you talk about medication, supplements, things like that. Those things may make you feel nauseous, or they may increase your appetite. They can have impacts on your relationship with food. What I'm more focused on is with emotional eating, the problem isn't really food itself. Or needing a meal plan or needing to know the right foods to eat. Most of the people I work with, they joke, they say, I could write my own book. They're like, I don't have any credentials, but I've done everything under the sun. And at this point, I could write my own book telling you about what to eat. Their problem is, and this was my problem too, when I was struggling with emotional eating, is I knew all of the right things and what to eat, what to do, but I wasn't able to do it because with emotional eating, you're actually using food to numb or avoid feeling your feelings. And so it doesn't actually have much to do with food, say the Cheetos, the ice cream, the salad, right? It really doesn't have much to do with that. It has more to do with trying to avoid feeling bad or to feel good, because food can make you feel pleasure and reward and make you feel good too.
Yeah. I think a lot of people suffer from emotional eating. It's because it's that I'm not hungry, I don't want anything, but I'm going to go get something because once I have it, it makes me feel better about what's going on.
Exactly. And what I always like to just throw out there is, we can kind of thank God that food works that way, right? Like this is not a bad thing that food can make us feel good. It's a wonderful thing. There's a lot in life that can make us feel bad. So let's celebrate that there are things that can make us feel good. And yet, when food becomes the go-to for coping with, life, the emotions of life, that becomes a problem, because then you really can start to get some blood sugar imbalance. Your cholesterol may become an issue, right? It can be at risk for diabetes and heart disease and certain cancers. And that's no good. We want a peaceful relationship with food where we can trust ourselves to care for ourselves well, rather than always feeling anxious or contentious, or, self-critical is another thing. Just that negative self-talk coming from the choices that you make every day. And we all have to eat, all the time throughout the day. And so to self-flagellate every time can really have an impact on your quality of life.
That's the problem too, because the food makes you feel good until after, and then you feel bad. So it's got that, high and then the low.
It's kind of like that never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
Right? You feel good, you feel bad, so you eat, and then you feel good, but then you feel bad about eating what made you feel good. Then, just like a loop, continuous loop.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, with emotional eating, we're using food to avoid feeling bad. So when that self-criticism makes you feel bad, exactly like you say, you turn to food to feel better. But the beautiful thing about any kind of loop is there's always multiple places to intervene, right? And I think one of the best places is to first figure out why you're eating, like what are the feelings that are causing you to eat, and to think about how you can feel those instead. Oftentimes I talk to people, and this is kind of the prevailing advice, and it's the prevailing bad advice, I would say, for people who are struggling. And you've probably heard it before, like, oh, well, if you're emotionally eating, just don't do that. Go do something else instead. I don't know if the advice of just don't do that has ever solved anybody's problems, but it certainly didn't solve mine when I was struggling with emotional eating. And for me, it was back in grad school. I was studying nutrition, right? Learning all of the right things to do, and yet still struggling all the time when my, perfect little eating plan that I so carefully constructed with my dietitian knowledge fell through, because it always did, because I was using food for my emotional comfort. And so learning to actually feel the emotion, right? It really doesn't have to do with food. It has to do with allowing yourself to feel the discomfort of boredom, grief, sadness, even joy. Brene Brown, the great shame researcher, talks about how when you numb the hard emotions, you numb the good ones too. And that's really a consequence of using food for these purposes.
Is there one, or what are the most common, I guess, say, emotions that cause people to go into that cycle?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And I think the big one is stress. And I think stress probably underlies most of the difficult emotion that people are using to numb with food. Because emotional eating on its own, you get a blood sugar imbalance, and you're self-criticizing, and that feels unsafe, and so you're getting a stress response just from doing it in your body. And so of course, that's, I almost think of stress as like just kind of the bottom layer of the cheesecake or whatever. Like it's just always there, whatever other emotions are piled on top. And again, like stress is one of those things, I think, where people just have really bad advice for how to handle it. Like, well, just don't worry about that. Just let it go, right? Like if only, or go for a walk. Even some of these like well-meaning, maybe even good advice can feel so invalidating, and it doesn't really work unless you're doing it all the time, periodically, right? So just one walk isn't going to solve the stress issue. Stress is a big one. Tired, is another one. This is where the frappuccinos come in. No shame out there for those. We're getting into the holiday season as we talk here, as we record, and there's the pumpkin spice. There's the upcoming like holiday shaped sprinkles. They're going to be on the drinks. And so when you're tired, that sugar, that caffeine, right? Like it works for a minute. Again, like it works for a little bit. But ultimately you get the crash and you feel bad and et cetera. And, I just want to note what's coming up for me as we're talking about this is there's so much shame. I must be hungry because everything I'm telling you as I'm talking, I'm having visuals of food in my mind. And the visual I get when I think of shame is like spreading thick butter on a piece of toast. So if this conversation is our toast, and like, yeah, forgive me. When we're done, I promise you I will go eat lunch. The shame is like just the butter on top. And what I mean by shame is, again, I'm a Brene Brown fan. So her definition of shame is feeling unworthy of love and connection with other people because of who you are, what you've done. And so often people believe and they feel ashamed that they are unworthy of love and connection with other people because of their eating habits, the way that they're eating, the size of their body. And oftentimes when I say it out loud, I think people are like, oh, you woo-woo hippie, like, what are you talking about? That's so extreme, right? It sounds extreme. But when we really think about it, so many people hold these messages that they will never have an intimate partner if they live in a larger body or keep eating the way that they're eating, right? That they won't be lovable, that someone won't find them attractive. That's shame. That's shame. So, even talking about being tired and being stressed, I think there's shame associated with that. Like, why are you so busy? Why do you allow your life to be so crazy that you're tired and stressed all the time? Especially as women, I can only speak from my own personal experience. And we just have to, the thing I want people to get out of this conversation is a little self-compassion, a little self-acceptance goes a really long way when you're tired, stressed, right? Angry is another one, anger, whatever it may be, nostalgic as we're heading into the holidays, that's another big one for eating. If those are causing you to eat, or you don't even know why you're eating, because that often happens too. Like if we're disconnected from our emotions, we may not know what they are. And I just want to say that's okay and that's normal. And again, there's no shame if that's you. If you want to feel your emotions and you want to stop with the emotional eating, the first step is to be kind to yourself and to accept that it's happening. And think, what would you say to a friend? The classic, I don't know, it's not the golden rule, but like the next step down, I think. What would you say to a friend who is struggling with this? Because that's going to go a long ways towards breaking that cycle we talked about of the self-criticism leading to feeling bad, leading to eating more.
By the way, you're too young to be a hippie.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, okay. From a like decade perspective, yeah, but from a maybe deep in my heart perspective, I don't know.
So do you think social media is a contributing factor to people?
Oh yeah. Such a great point. I love that point. I was reading the book Burnout the other day by the sisters Amelia and Emily Nagasaki, and they cite some studies done in the Fijian Islands in the mid-90s, which I think are just as applicable to today. And what they talk about happening is in Fiji, there was no TV until like 1996 or something, like mid-90s, we'll say. Nobody had TV. And then all at once, the TVs came, and in like a couple months span of time, everybody had a TV and everybody had access to British and American television. And within several months, a great percentage of the adolescent girls had eating disorders within several months. And then fast forward to a year later, after the introduction of TVs, almost 30% of adolescent girls had eating disorders. Now, of course, that's the Fijian Islands and it's adolescent girls, and we're really talking more about adults. But I think it's a really astounding, horrifying, right? A description of the impact that media can have on our perceptions of ourselves. And not only that, but there was a study done by the Ohio State University did a study a few years ago where they looked at, and again, I'm talking about women in particular here, but I know there's a lot of research around men's perceptions of themselves as well, but women's perceptions of themselves as they age. And they found that women, 40 and under felt about their bodies, how they felt about their bodies was determined by what their bodies could do for them. Women 40 and over, this is going to be like a mental circus for a second, so listen carefully. How they felt about their bodies was determined by what they perceived that other people felt about their bodies. And what is the media telling us? It's telling us we're too big, or we're too small, we're too old, we're too, not usually too young, right? Skin's not clear enough, whatever. The media is never telling you that you look great and you are perfect just the way you are. So that influence is, number one, unchecked, because this isn't something we talk about enough or even think about in our own lives. I mean, I've been thinking about it lately, but this is what I do. But like, how many times have we stopped to think, like, I wonder how the media is impacting my relationship to food and my body and myself? Like, no one has had that thought unless they are in probably an eating disorder recovery. So yes, yes, how does social media impact? A lot, and it's not positive.
See, I would have thought women young in the 20s, particularly around the teens and 20s, would really be more concerned about how others perceive them instead of after 40, because, that's you're in the dating, and all that. So, I would have thought that they would be really conscious then, probably more so than the 40s. But, that's just.
I agree. I think too, we also think of kind of the older woman, and I'm not saying 40 is an older woman, so don't mishear me, but I'm telling you the stereotype, but the older woman who doesn't care what anybody thinks. But what I'm finding, because I work primarily with women in their 50s and 60s, and of course, I just have a small sample of these women, so it's not everybody. I wonder if women don't get there until they're 80 or 90. And truly, it is an older woman that we're thinking of. But I know for me, the women I work with, we're all trying to get there a little bit sooner.
What happens there, it's because of, men, when they get older, they get distinguished. Women, when they get older, they get old. Yeah. And the wrinkles on a man is distinguished and handsome, and the wrinkles on a woman, it's just old. So there's, and they've got all of these things. I mean, look at how many actresses have gotten, facelifts. You can't keep, I don't want one, but there's so many people with Botox, facelifts, creams, no crazy. You can stay looking young. I mean, I earned every one of my wrinkles. I'm not getting any younger, and I accept that. I mean, I could get the little, saggies on your arms and stuff. I'm 59. This is not going to, I can work out, 5 hours a day in the gym maybe and reduce it, but I don't want to do that. I want to live my life a little bit more fulfilled, right? So it's just that acceptance. But there's a lot of women when they get to that stage, and particularly, if you're single too, it's even worse, because you're going, well, now I'm too old. No guy's going to look at me. Those 60-year-old men are going after the 30 and 40-year-old women. And that's their thoughts, because of all that media, again, showing older men with younger women, and the way they talk about, I'm with a hot young one, and you're going, well, may as well stay single. It's easier. Yeah.
Well, from a guy's perspective, or from my perspective as a guy, let me put it that way. You know, when you're 20 years old, you know, the pretty girl, you know, yeah, you're looking for that. But when you get in your 40s and 50s, you know, it's more, in my opinion, for me, it'd be more about what's on the inside of that person. You know, and I definitely don't want a 20-year-old nothing. You know, I have nothing in common with a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, anything. But, you know, there are guys, it's an ego boost for them. It's, you know, a brag, you know, to the buddies. But, you know, I think most women grow old gracefully.
You heard it here first.
I was just going to say quickly, here's something they say too, Roy, for the men who go after the younger women, it's because of their fear of mortality. It's been said that because it makes them feel younger being with a younger woman, so that their mortality is not as, it's not in the face of the person they're with. And they've had studies where that's what that reason is for some of the men anyway. I'm not saying all men, but it is for some.
Well, I mean, some tend to go middle-aged crazy. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, it's a fact.
I love this. You know what? I love this conversation and I'm so appreciative of it, and I'm going to clip it and I'm going to share it because I have so many women come to me. So I'm helping women repair their relationships with food and their bodies. And oftentimes those relationships are scarred by decades of dieting. And one of the drivers for all of that dieting and self-harm and self-hatred is that from a young age, they were told that men aren't going to love them if they're fat, or men aren't going to love them if they're perfect. And, you know, this desire for like love and belonging, right? Like that's a normal human need and desire. And, you know, it's so, I think it's another point that we just take this stuff in, right? And we don't really realize what's there or what beliefs we're operating from. And so then everything else we hear, we just file under, yep, that proves that that was true, without ever really checking to say, like, this belief I have, is it a belief I want to have? Is it a belief I want to base my life decisions on? Because I think if we stop, most of the women I work with, when they stop and really pull it to light, they're like, no, that's not the belief that I want to base my life on. I want to love and accept myself just as I am. And, you know, like to your point, Lorianne, I don't want to spend 5 hours a day in a gym to, you know, have a little less wobble. That makes me not happy at all. And so just this proof here that there are alternate viewpoints. Not everyone thinks that the size of your body or how many wrinkles you have makes you lovable or unlovable. I'm like, yeah, I love this. There are people who do think that way, and they're not the kind of people we want to be friends with, right, guys?
Well, now my perspective is a little warped. I'll be transparent there, because I've been married for 100 years. So, you know, my perspective is different than probably a lot of people's. Just throwing that out there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. I think, you know, recognizing where or why we have the beliefs we have about food and our bodies and ourselves is really, you know, the path forward. And then layering on top of that the self-acceptance and self-kindness that I talked about earlier to stop that, you know, self-critical cycle that leads to feeling out of control around food. Again, if we're spreading butter on toast rather than spreading shame and continuing to feel bad, it's like spreading a warm hug and feeling good, right? And I think we sometimes think, gosh, you know, I don't deserve to feel good, or if I feel good, something's wrong. You know, we get stuck in these hustle cycles, which often come from a history of trauma, if I'm being perfectly honest. But just being able to stop and say, no, I'm safe to feel my emotions. I can be kind to myself. I can love myself, and I don't, you know, need to work for the love of other people. That can be really powerful in healing eating issues. And that's what I discovered as I was figuring out my own emotional eating issues, that it really has less to do about food. Really, I mean, what I just described to you has nothing to do with food, right? And so here I am, a registered dietitian, trained to give you the exact number of, protein, fat, and calories you need to live your best life. I don't want to talk about any of that, because what we really need to talk about to heal these eating issues is how well you love yourself and how much you can care for yourself and make decisions out of that, rather than decisions out of not loving yourself, hating yourself.
Cassie, how could our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah. You can go to my website, cassiechristopher.net. And if you would like my help to heal emotional eating, you can actually go to cassiechristopher.net/free and download my guide. It's called You're Done Dieting, but Still Want to Heal Emotional Eating. And it is the roadmap to help you achieve peace and freedom with food and feel comfortable in your own skin. So I give you, step by step, what it's going to take, and the first couple steps to get started towards healing. And again, it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with food.
Okay, great.
Well said. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that and sharing your story.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
it was our pleasure, believe me. It was fun.